There was a time when Africa stood as a continent of kingdoms, empires that stretched across deserts, rainforests, and rivers. Lands ruled by kings and queens, elders and warriors, spiritualists and farmers. Africa had its own rhythm, its own languages, trade systems, beliefs, and codes of life. People lived in harmony with nature, governed by tradition and communal ties. Yes, there were conflicts, there were mistakes, but the identity was intact. The soul was African. Then, something came from beyond the seas. It did not ask permission. It did not come to learn. It came to take. First, they came as traders, then as missionaries, then as conquerors. By the late 1800s, the great European powers, Britain, France, Belgium, Germany, Portugal, and others, had one goal: to divide and dominate Africa. Not for Africans' benefit, but to feed the hunger of their factories, their markets, their crowns. At the Berlin Conference of 1884-85, not a single African was invited. Yet, in a matter of weeks, the map of Africa was drawn and redrawn by European men with pens and whiskey. They drew borders across rivers, over mountains, through ancestral lands, without any knowledge of the people who lived there. Ancient enemies were forced to live together. United tribes were torn apart. And in that moment, Africa's future changed forever. The conquest was swift and brutal. Kingdoms that had ruled for centuries fell to European guns. The mighty Zulu Empire was crushed by the British. The powerful Ashanti were defeated after years of resistance. The once proud Congo was handed over to King Leopold II of Belgium, not to a government, but to one man, who ran it as his personal colony, turning it into a massive labor camp. Men were whipped for not meeting rubber quotas. Women were held hostage. Children had their hands cut off. Millions died in Leopold's Congo Free State. And that was just one colony. In Kenya, the British took the most fertile lands from the Kikuyu people, calling it the White Highlands. Those who resisted were branded as terrorists. Thousands were tortured in detention camps. In Namibia, German forces carried out one of the first genocides of the 20th century, nearly wiping out the Herero and Nama peoples. In Nigeria, artificial borders lumped together the Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, and other groups into one colony. These were nations with distinct languages, religions, and customs, but to the British, it was just a cost-saving measure. They governed indirectly, choosing local chiefs who would obey them, not those chosen by the people. Everywhere, the story was the same. African ways of life were declared primitive. European languages replaced native tongues in schools. Traditional religions were demonized, while European customs and Western beliefs were forced onto communities. The continent's natural wealth, gold, diamonds, cocoa, oil, was extracted and sent overseas. Africans became laborers in their own lands. But colonization was not just about politics or economy. It was psychological warfare. It told Africans they were inferior, that their past was meaningless, that their future could only be shaped by foreign hands. Generation after generation was taught to admire European heroes, recite foreign histories, and believe that black skin was a curse. Children grew up not knowing their grandparents' language. Adults began to see their traditions as backward. Even the concept of beauty was rewritten. Skin was to be lightened, hair to be straightened, minds to be colonized. And perhaps that was the deepest wound of all, the theft of identity. Even as independence swept across the continent in the 1950s and 60s, the damage had already been done. New African leaders inherited borders they didn't draw. They inherited systems they didn't build. They were forced to govern nations that were not united in culture or history. And so, the seeds of conflict were planted. In Rwanda, Belgian colonizers created a rigid division between Hutus and Tutsis, favoring one over the other. This artificial hierarchy would later explode into genocide. In Sudan, the British favored the Arab North over the African South, laying the groundwork for decades of civil war. In Nigeria, the struggle between tribes, regions, and religions, stoked by colonial policies, led to a brutal civil war that claimed over 1 million lives. And yet, even after colonization officially ended, its shadow never left. Former colonial powers maintained economic control through trade deals, military aid, and debt. Multinational corporations continued to extract resources, paying governments just enough to stay silent. Western nations handpicked leaders, often dictators, who would protect their interests. In return, they turned a blind eye to corruption and repression. So many African nations, rich in minerals and talent, remain trapped in cycles of poverty and instability. And while fingers are often pointed at local leaders, and yes, there is blame to be shared, it's impossible to understand today's Africa without understanding what colonization destroyed. It destroyed education systems rooted in African values. It replaced communal wealth with individual greed. It dismantled self-government and replaced it with bureaucracies designed to serve foreign masters. It created a deep distrust in institutions because for generations, institutions were the enemy. And perhaps that was the deepest wound of all. It fractured the African spirit. But even in this darkness, there is light. The resilience of the African people cannot be denied. Movements have risen to reclaim language, culture, and history. African writers, artists, and thinkers are telling their own stories. Diaspora voices are reconnecting with ancestral roots. Young people are refusing to let colonization define them. But the healing is slow because the wound was deep. Africa was never the same after colonization, not because it was weak, but because it was betrayed. Betrayed by the world, betrayed by its conquerors, and sometimes even betrayed by its own. But Africa is still here, still rising, still remembering, still dreaming. The chains may be gone, but the scars remain. And only by confronting the full truth, not just of what was done, but what was lost, can Africa truly reclaim what was once stolen: her voice, her pride, her future.